This is episode 23 in the ongoing video series of Torreya Guardians. Today is February 6, 2018, and this is going to be an unusual one. Instead of having a distinct field experience somewhere, it's going to be what I in particular have learned traveling the country about the likely habitat preferences of this endangered conifer tree, Florida Torreya. This video is going to be an amalgam of natural history observations and speculations and learnings in several sites that I've been able to visit or even make some experiments in. The first one I'm going to start with was before I had access to video, and so I'll be putting together a bunch of photographs from a 2005 string of visits I made while in California for other reasons to a variety of sites in Sequoia National Park, Yosemite National Park, north of Santa Cruz, a forest there, and then the Coast Range northwest of Napa Valley, of the cousin of Florida Torreya, California Torreya. This genus, Torreya, is very old, mid-Jurassic. It used to be circumboreal back when climate was much warmer, and then starting in the cold of the Oligocene about 34 million years ago, it had to move south, had tens of thousands of years to be able to slowly move south. And then in the Pleistocene time, when it cooled even more, it had to move way south as it could get. And that's down along the Apalachicola River, which is the lowest extent of what starts as the Chattahoochee River in the southern Appalachians. So the first thing I'm going to show is natural history observations of the close cousin California Torreya, Torreya californica, that I made in 2005. And this is very important, I think, for people working on Florida Torreya to see what the capacity of this genus is. And also, very much to see the preferred habitats that it has. It's probably very similar to what our Florida Torreya has, but we've never been able to see that before because it's been stuck in its peak glacial refuge, could not float back up the Chattahoochee River, which is probably how it got back down from the southern Appalachians during the cooling period of the Pleistocene. But nobody's been able to see what it can really do. It's been hanging out in the coldest steep head ravines down in its relic refuge, but it was left behind, and it started being attacked by native diseases, at least native diseases, starting in the 50s and 60s as we reached peak interglacial. And now with anthropogenic climate change, it's just going to keep getting worse. Hasn't reproduced there, I think, since the 60s, pretty much so. Endangered Species Act officials are trying to return it to Florida, but they're finding that the best way to grow seeds, to grow the species to a reproductive age, is actually in northern Georgia. And that says something. So people who want to engage in orchard-style plantings, as the officials in the Endangered Species Act do in Smith Gall Woods, a wonderful orchard there producing seeds. Northern Georgia, many different ways to do it. The reason I personally got involved in founding Torreya Guardians is I believe that any species that is left behind from peak glacial, and there's quite a few along the California coast, conifers in particular, that are left behind species too. But that what's needed for them is not pampering. They don't need to be in the hospice wing. They don't need to have genetic manipulation. All we need to do is move them. We need to be like fast-moving squirrels, moving them up into the southern Appalachians and then testing even further northward. For as climate changes, we need to see how far ahead of climate change we can get them, because this is a very slow-growing species. So anyway, California is the first series of photographs I'm going to show and comment on in my attempt here to show how important natural history observations are for deciding what's best to do for this species, and especially anyone like me who agrees that rewilding is important, that ultimately we want to get the species out of the hospice wing, and we want to find in this climate, where does it prefer to be? What successional stages in forests in different latitudes does it prefer to be at? East-facing slopes, north-facing? What are the associated plants that suggest it has the right microclimate? All these kinds of things. Rewilding is trying to discern what are its habitat preferences. And then all we have to do is get the seed back there and prevent squirrels from eating the seeds before they germinate. That's a big one. I've been working on that too. It's called free planting, where we actually put the seeds right into the ground in regrowth forest, exactly where we think we want them to grow, and then try to protect them with rocks or planting deep enough so that the squirrels and voles won't be getting to them. But what's important here is the natural history observations that can give us suggestions of the precious seeds that we have. Where should we experiment with putting them in? And I'm going to show first the California, how those trees grow, where they grow, how they seem to work with other species over time, and they are definitely mostly a sub-canopy species. That's very important to know, sub-canopy. But they don't reproduce seeds so long as they're in sub-canopy. They have to get up above the forest, other trees around them, or they need to have a road that's put in, and boom, they start producing seeds. And I'll show some examples of that too. Our observations of the California Torreya, that is the cousin of Florida Torreya, in the wild, all took place in 2005, the spring and early summer. And we're going to begin in the Coast Range northwest of Napa Valley. There'll be 2 sites there that we'll be looking at. Now, this is February 2018, and so just a couple months ago was the horrific Tubbs fire off to the north of the Napa Valley area of Santa Rosa. And so, of course, I went on the map, here it is, to take a look of where it took place. And you can see at the top, that's Robert Louis Stevenson State Park. And you see there's a road along the Golden Road there along the right-hand side of it. The first place that I went to was in that state park, but I think it was pretty close to the road. I didn't go far in off the trail, so it probably was outside of the fire. The second place I went to, if you look down into that gray urban area, that's Calistoga, and there was a northeast-facing ravine that I went and explored. Diamond Mountain Road went along there. So I think both of the places I'm going to be showing you are actually still there, that they weren't burned, but I can't be sure. So the first place we went to was Robert Louis Stevenson State Park. And I say we because I had an accomplice with me who actually drove there, knew the area, Napa Valley resident, Jim O'Laughlin. And here's Jim standing by the biggest Torreya californica tree that we saw. We didn't go very far up the trail. We saw about, I'd say, 50 to 60 individuals along the way, but they were all pretty small. Now for the context, take a look. Here's Jim walking up the trail. There were both redwoods and Douglas fir there, very big trees, huge evergreen conifers. But you can see that even so, there's still some sunlight dabbling in. So that's a good sign for the understory, including California Torreya. And you can see it's not going to try to go up into the canopy. It can't make it there. So when it finds some sunlight, it reaches out more horizontally. This was about 2,000 feet high elevation. Now this was more common, what we'd find in the shade. You see there isn't any dappled sunlight coming in here. multi-stemmed. The older stems just kind of lean over, and then at some point they just give up the ghost, and the younger basals take over. But look how flat those leaflets are. That's very characteristic of the yew family, Taxaceae, and Torreya is a member of the yew family. At the top of the picture here is another one, and similar, not really much sun coming in, but at the bottom, Jim's leaning over from the trail, and this is the only seedling that we found. In contrast, we went off trail just a little bit upslope because I saw at a distance a young grove of California Torreya. Look how healthy they look. Look at all the greenery there. They must be finding some sun. All of the stems in the foreground and some of the background too are Torreya californica. And it was in this grove that I was able to see and take a photograph looking up with a flash on my camera of one seed. I saw another one higher up, but there were only 2 seeds that I saw growing in this grove. And what I've seen is characteristic of both the Florida and the California Torreya is that there must be a significant amount of sun at some time during the day coming in on a branch in order for that branch to produce a seed. So that's it for the Robert Louis Stevenson Torreya trip that Jim O'Loughlin and I took on May 30th. 2 days later, we came back. Calistoga is just a little bit to the northeast there, and I've got a close-up here. This was at about between 1,000 and 1,300 feet off Diamond Mountain Road. We were able to find a northeast-facing ravine, and that's ideal because it's sheltered from the hot, late-day sun. Here you can see the stump of a redwood looking back toward the road. Jim didn't accompany me into the ravine because I had to go upslope both sides, and it was very, very steep there. That's a Torreya californica leaning over, and there's a seedling in front of it. Here's a couple more seedlings on the opposite slope, and those are redwoods in the background. You can see how shady it is here. That's a flash of my camera that went off. Good place to stop and take a look at what's up above us there. That's a Torreya branch on the left. There at the top is a shed redwood branchlet. That's a Douglas fir cone on the right, and then the cap of some kind of an oak. This is the biggest California Torreya that I encountered. You can see how steep the slope is, and you can see that it's actually reached the canopy. Look at all the sun coming through. Whether it was male or female, I don't know, but if it were female or if it had some female branches, it certainly would have been producing some seeds. Here I climbed up, and this is a close-up flash camera here looking at the bottom of the trunk. Moving up a bit to the side, you can see, even though it's very healthy, there's a couple of basal sprouts coming out from the uphill side. More often than not, however, California Torreya I encountered didn't have a lot of sun, and so they were doing this. The branch gets up to a certain size, it leans over looking for sun, it gets covered with moss, and another basal heads straight up. Now, if we follow that branch out to the left, I'm not sure if this is the same tree, but a lot of them were this way. Take a look. It's still alive. It's even below slope than horizontal, and it's sending up vertical stems right from that leaning branch. It's amazing what these trees are able to do in their quest for sunlight. Finally, just a couple more baby pictures of seedlings that I found. Both of these are pictures taken where the flash automatically goes off. It's that shady. This was the only seed that I found in a spot that I could reach up to and take a photograph of. Finally, there was one place where I encountered a fallen log that was charred on the bottom side. so I picked up a couple pieces of charcoal, laid it on top, just as a reminder, even back in 2005, that fires do occasionally come through here. And apparently, the torreyas survive. Several weeks, early May 2005, before I visited the Torreya trees northwest of Napa Valley, my husband and I spent time in the Sierras. You can find California Torreya in both Sequoia Kings Canyon National Parks and in Yosemite National Parks, and only on the west side. A dozen years after I posted a photo essay on the website about Torreya californica in the Sierras, I've just reread that page, especially the conclusions that I drew from the observations I was making. I think those observations still hold, and so I'm going to read some paragraphs from that page while I paste in some photos from Yosemite and Sequoia National Parks. You'll find a lot more on that page, including specific directions on if you too want to go and see these sites. You'll see how to get there. During my quest for California Torreya in Sequoia and Yosemite National Parks in May 2005, I found that Torreya californica is, as the literature states, locally abundant wherever it is found, and seems to be reproducing well in those spots, both from seeds and from stump sprouts of older rootstock. There was no easily observable evidence of disease. The only problem for this species is that it is not widespread. The localities where it is found are few, spotty, and very limited in size. This is the only stem system that I saw where anything had been damaged by rodents. I don't know if that's a rabbit or a deer rub, but you can see that the stem on the left is healthy, and there's a little basal coming out on the far right. Note: my companion scout for Sequoia National Park was Harold Wood of Visalia. For Yosemite National Park, my husband, Michael Dowd. Although the literature shows a wide range of plant associations, I observe that California Torreya in the Sierras seems to associate well with a rather low overstory of California live oak, which is evergreen, and California bay laurel, also evergreen. Here are some pictures I took of our exploration uphill on the opposite side of the road from the scene of the previous picture. Again, the overstory is live oak and bay laurel on this south-facing slope, possibly water-stressed on occasion and maybe even suffering from avalanches. You see, Torreya does just fine here as a sub-canopy tree too. This individual holds tight to a rock. Its stem and bark features strike me as dwarfing. That is, this is a tough place to live, and though the tree trunk is not big, this particular Torreya might be several centuries old. Although the literature pinpoints many spots for finding California Torreya in the Sierras, I went to just 3 locations. One was in Sequoia National Park at about 4,100 feet elevation, and the other 2 were in Yosemite, elevations approximately 5,000 and 3,500 feet. California Torreya seems to occur at an altitude or slope aspect above California buckeye, but below the ponderosa pine level. Ponderosa pines are rather rare, if present at all, in Torreya habitat, and Douglas fir are practically non-existent. In higher or moister, that is cooler habitats nearby, I did find a lot of sapling Douglas fir and incense cedar that seemed to be filling the same niche of understory evergreen conifer. Update: as we already saw, Douglas fir is associated with California Torreya over in the Coast Range by Napa Valley. The 2 species just didn't seem to co-occur in the Sierras. Another interesting positive association was that in all three locales, poison oak was in close association with a good portion of the California Torreya specimens. Overall, I get the sense that Torreya californica does best where it is the only conifer attempting to fill the understory niche, and where the overstory trees have a habit of spreading widely and creating a lot of shade, such that the ground itself is rather bare of plants, though has a nice bed of decomposing leaves for seed germination. In Yosemite, the overstory trees were almost exclusively non-conifer evergreen, that is, live oak and California bay laurel. In Sequoia National Park, the overstory included both of those evergreen species. But because this site was moister than the Yosemite sites, it supported taller specimens of each, sometimes with amazingly big trunk girths. The site in Sequoia National Park also supported a good number of tall, deciduous white oak and very impressively tall bigleaf maples and just a few western white pines. I get the sense that California Torreya prefers sunny conditions, but rarely can it find a spot in which it can have a lot of sun without feeling the pinch of either unwelcome understory competition or outright drought. Unlike Doug fir and incense cedar, California Torreya germinates from a very large seed. With all the stored energy, it is able to establish in light conditions far too diminished for the other conifers. Thus, no competitor is able to establish in some rocky places where California Torreya does. And once it finds its way into the light, it is ensured continued isolation. Look at the glorious way that California Torreya adapts to full sun. Those branches don't look anything like a U. Actually, they look like a Douglas fir. One cautionary note in interpreting these pictures. Just because it's got a large seed and it's so it can germinate and establish as a seedling in pretty much perpetual shade, that doesn't mean that it's going to be able to grow to sapling height. If it can't find a shaft of sunlight, or if the mycorrhizal fungi aren't willing to connect it with the other canopy trees and therefore feed it sugar for a while to help it get tall, well, it's probably going to die. That means that some of the seedling photos that I'm showing here probably won't turn into even saplings, much less tall trees. Let's take a special look at this seedling photo. It's the only seedling I came across that seemed to preference two stems from the outset. But what we can see from some of the biggest trees that I found in the Sierras, especially the ones along cliffs, they didn't occur as single trunks. They occurred as either doublets or, in this case, triplets. These two sets occur both in the Sequoia National Park on a very, very steep edge, going right off onto a cliff. In fact, I was afraid to find my way down to the trees because if I couldn't hold on to them, I would have gone off the edge. Now, if it got a lot of sun all its life, it could be fairly young. But if it was overtopped for a while and struggling, it could be hundreds of years old. In this way, it's very similar to the eastern hemlock, and in fact, mountain hemlock too, out west. And that is, as sub-canopy adepts, they're quite capable of just hanging out, looking somewhat healthy, and just waiting the decades and centuries for a canopy opening to occur. The odds are that Florida Torreya is probably capable of acting in the same way. And that means that those of us who are intent on rewilding this endangered species, getting it back up into the southern Appalachians and even beyond, getting it into regrowth forest, we've got to reduce our expectations. And that means that we have to think of Florida Torreya as a sub-canopy species quite happy to wait around for a liriodendron or an oak to fall, rather than trying to have it race up as high as it can go, which is probably only about 60 feet. That seems to be what the records indicate for what Florida Torreya used to do before all the diseases struck. But before we fully reduce our expectations, let's take a virtual field trip to the place in California that has the champion California Torreyas in it.